Welcome to the Leaders of B2B podcast, a weekly show where we bring you interviews and in the weeds expertise with today's B2B experts and thought leaders. You can see more about today's episode and guest by visiting our website at leadersofb2b.com. This episode is brought to you by Content Allies. We help B2B companies launch revenue-generating podcasts. We schedule interviews between you and your ideal prospects and strategic partners. You show up for engaging conversations, we handle everything else. Ready to build a podcast that grows your business in just 1 hour per week? Reach out to us at contentallies.com.
Hey leaders, welcome back. This is Ledge. Thanks for showing up for another episode of Leaders of B2B. Today, my guest is Deon Nicholas. Deon, I would love if you would give an introduction of yourself and your work for the audience who doesn't know you yet.
Absolutely. Ledge, so happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm Deon Nicholas. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Forethought. And we are the generative AI suite for customer support automation. And I promise we were around before the Gen AI hype recent. We launched in 2018, actually at TechCrunch Disrupt, which was super exciting. And since then, we've grown to working with high growth companies like Instacart, Marriott, many others to power their customer service using AI. Prior to starting Forethought, I was a software engineer and an AI researcher at University of Waterloo, as well as Silicon Valley-based companies like Facebook, Palantir, and Pure Storage. So yeah, excited to be here.
It sounds like you said that a few times. Yeah, that was the first thing that popped in my head, looking at it, like y'all have been doing this since 2017, 2018. And I think you won Disrupt, isn't that right? Yeah. So you left that out, but I'm going to give props. So, yeah.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. No, that was, it was super cool. I still remember that day. It was, kind of a blur, but a dream come true in many ways.
Awesome. That's awesome. And yeah, the whole thing, like, I always want to be like, just like cut to the chase. Is it like super annoying when the whole like zeitgeist catches up with like what you knew already? And you're just like, dudes, we've been doing this for 5 years. Like, yeah, we know.
It was good and bad. I think we went through like 5 stages of grief or some variation of that, because at first we're like, yeah, it was like this isn't new, everyone. Like Gen AI has been around, GPT even, you're right. GPT-2 has been around since what, 2019. Get with the program, everyone. And then eventually we were like, but wait, how does this actually change our business now? How does this change the market, right? And eventually we popped out, skipping the stages, we popped out to acceptance. But the real punchline here is, one, demand went way up. A lot of people who we had previously been banging on their doors saying, hey, you need AI for your customer support, started to flip, and they started banging on our door saying, hey, we need AI for customer support. So I think that was really good. But also, yes, at the same time, I think this space has gotten really noisy. There are a lot of folks who, cropped up in the last 2 to 3 months, slapped GPT on a label somewhere and said, hey, we're an AI company. And so from the practitioner side, on the B2B leader side, it has gotten, I think, a lot harder to understand, okay, what's real in the space, what's not. And so I think, there's pros and cons to hype cycles.
Right. To the world catching up. Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And it must be, yeah, the noise, right? Like of just like, I mean, the number of emails I've gotten recently for like, oh yeah, we can turn all your customer support chatbots and everything into, AI. And I'm sure you guys are like way ahead of that, conversation. And, you can just look at the logo bar on the site. Like, okay, this is in play at major places. What have you learned about this, space? Because I think everybody still has a little bit of that visceral sort of like, ew, I just want to talk to a human. And yet I'm a huge user of AI, tools. And when, GPT now, like I mean, just gosh, I'll try anything with this stuff. So, it's like, how do you talk to about this to make it like a really good additive thing? And it's not just like the next version of, dare I say, like Comcast support. So
Oh my gosh, tell me about it. I had to. my internet recently. I
I
don't
mean,
even want to go there, but
Frosted Comcast has
but
gotten a little bit better, but I'm sorry, but you are
that's
still the
true.
butt
That's
of
true.
the customer service jokes.
I agree. But yeah, I think the what we've learned in kind of articulating to business leaders about this space is that there have basically been two camps of AI customer support automation companies, each with their own limitations. And our goal has been to kind of transcend those limitations, so to speak. So the first camp that we're all talking about, giving the shout out to, your internet service providers of the world. First camp is chatbots, right? So the first wave has always been, manual decision tree based, automation based systems, right? And the word AI has been thrown around a lot, but in many ways it's not, it's not necessarily intelligent, but it's artificial. And those are all about just making it easy to make repetitive things, put them on auto, right? And so what I mean by that is you have to hard code these rules into these chatbots saying, if I see the word refund, go issue refund or go and take this action. And I think for the past decade, that has been the state of the art in this whole space. And look, they work. They can actually deflect issues. They can, solve certain problems. But the problem is they're clunky as heck, right? Like the user experience is the worst. We all know it. We all have our, chatbot story of just having to deal with that. And so they kind of give you this correctness and specificity at the risk and at the cost of that customer experience. And then for the B2B leaders who are implementing a lot of these things, it takes months often to deploy. You often have to hire teams of content or bot experts in order to build these. Right. And that was that whole first wave. And so what's beautiful about ChatGPT, GPT, the generative AI revolution, companies like, Forethought, what we're seeing is that there's now been this shift where the human experience and that customer experience has been elevated. We've all gotten to play with ChatGPT. We've all typed in little jokes or, write me this blog post or whatever. And it's very, very human. It's very almost empathetic, right? And very natural and delightful. And so what's happened with GPT and the modern generative AI revolution is that that bar for customer experience has gotten much higher, right? Now, the problem, as you kind of alluded to, Ledge, is that a lot of these companies, they just take, large language models, off the shelf language models, and then just say, hey, turn your customer service into GPT, right? And the big problem with that, and you're probably going to guess it, is hallucination, right? These LLMs literally
Make stuff up.
make stuff up. It's just like, where's my order? Well, did you know orders can be like, it's just
Right,
like,
where do you want it to be?
literally where you want it to be, right? And LLMs in that sense are really, really powerful creative tools, right?
Mm,
So, like, let's say you're working in marketing or you're trying to come up with a new piece of content. It's okay for the AI to make stuff up and just go off on a limb, right? But if you're, if it's a customer service question, if it's finance question, healthcare question, you want your doctors or your customer service agents responding with the correct answer. You can't go off on a limb. And so with these modern kind of GPT or LLM bolt-ons, you get that human experience, but they're not built on your data. They don't know anything about your policies, and so they're going to hallucinate. And so what we've learned is to be able to like focus on, well, how can we bridge that gap? How can we get the correctness and the ability to solve problems for the customer while still having a human centered experience? And so what we've done is we've built the only generative AI suite that's trained on your data. We ingest real past conversations from customers, real customers, and your best agents. Learn exactly how they said that. Use that to restrict, fine tune, and augment the model, the generation model, and that produces something that's way more accurate while giving you the benefits of correctness, the benefits of that human experience. And by the way, for the leaders deploying this, a very fast time to value because it's all built on your data.
right, right. And that training period, what's what's that like to go in? I mean, you got this massive, massive firm, right? And I imagine you got all different knowledge bases and Google Drives, and how about some PowerPoints? And yeah, oh, should we load in, our history from whatever help desk? And I mean,
Yeah.
there's probably a great deal of, dare I say, crap in that too. You know, how do you
Yeah. No, about it. We were talking a bit earlier about our TechCrunch disrupt pitch. If you actually go back and
Yeah.
listen to that pitch, that was exactly the premise that we were built on, which was that all of the information you need in order to build a performant AI system is actually built and already scattered in these data silos. So if you could build, call it like a search engine or a retrieval system, if you could build one of those, then you could take all that data, use that to train the AI, and then build something that's much more powerful. And so a lot of our architecture, a lot of our IP, a lot of our patents, ironically, are around the ability to take in all this data, sift through it, use AI to figure out, okay, separate the wheat from the chaff. Like this support ticket is irrelevant. This data is irrelevant. This Confluence article is irrelevant. But hey, this policy doc is, this support ticket is, and so on. And we have probably dozens of connectors built into our system today that pull in all that information, and we use all of our IP to actually figure out how to train the model.
Right.
So it's a messy business, so to speak. But that being said, it also creates a moat, and a lot of people talk about these modern LLM companies not really having a moat. And I think when you can build large scale data systems that actually can work on businesses' real data and ingest that in, 48 hours tops and kind of create this performance system, you get something magical.
Yeah, it reminds me of like, early on whenever it was more big data before it was machine learning and then, then AI sort of, but it was all that same thing. And I remember that, you know, all of these systems were useless unless you could have a really good data ingestion scheme. And the fact was that it was like 3 years of figuring out how to do ETL the right way. And it was like boring and
Yeah.
awful, but finally you came to, something, but it was that data transformation and ingestion that was the huge problem. After that, we all knew that if we had good data, we could make good stuff out of it.
Totally agreed.
So okay, talk to me about the journey from your, I think you said you're basically your academic work then to startup, things in the lab going to things in the real world with some stops of software engineering jobs along the way there. Um, it looked like a big sort of like either you had a plan, when I'm looking at Deon's resume, it's like I'm gonna do this someday and I'm just sort of sitting on it and getting experience and meeting people, or like what was that uh, the academic path to the sort of kitchen table and finally like we say go and I'm a CEO.
Yeah, no, great question. Yeah, I think like, in hindsight, you wrap it up in a bow and when you're pitching on TechCrunch or whatever, you're like, yeah, of course, this is all part of the plan. If anybody asks now, but it was a series of following my passions. Context, I grew up in inner city Toronto. Parents didn't have a lot of money. My dad, who's a mechanic, is always the tinkerer, right? And so he ended up putting together this like computer. We had Windows 95, like you know what I mean? Like
Oh
that
yeah.
was back in the day. And so I always remember I was on the computer and just like exposed to tech a lot when I was younger. Eventually learned to code and that became my superpower. And and always married this idea of leveraging technology with solving problems. And for me, it was always just curiosity, passion projects, and things like that throughout, call it high school and into university. Um, and there were a couple different points in my life where I started to kind of really just knock on the door of what is now natural language understanding and natural language processing. So high school actually interned at the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, which is this AI lab based in Edmonton in Canada. And there I was kind of exposed to AI for the first time. I was just like, "What is this?" It was machine learning at the time, supervised, like all of that. I was just this lowly intern, but like you kind of get exposed to some of these ideas, and then immediately after that, well, two things. One, my other kind of school job was in customer service at Shoppers Drug Mart, which is like the Canadian CVS, so to speak. So, answering customer questions on the floor, answering customer calls, etc. So, I had like started to, again in hindsight, a lot of trends around NLP, AI, as well as being able to apply it to answering customer questions. Like, actually think about it, like, okay, yeah, it's probably no secret or no surprise that I started Forethought. But it took like probably a decade after that before I started realizing it. Started getting super fascinated with AI, started getting super fascinated with how it can help people answer questions. I also, in school, being a math and computers guy, I was very bad at subjects like history. And so at the time, I was like, could this AI thing, ingest your notebooks and your textbooks and your information and help answer questions about like the French Revolution or whatever we were studying, right? And so there was this always this kind of side thread of like, hey, can AI help me answer questions? Help people answer questions. Um, the technology sucked back then. It was probably what 15 years ago, whatever it was, right? But um, then in university at Waterloo, where I went to school, also, studied computer science in general, but continued to study AI. Actually ended up publishing a couple academic papers in unsupervised machine learning. And so this just thread just stayed with me. Left school, worked, came out to the Bay Area, worked at a bunch of Silicon Valley companies. So I was just working as a software engineer. I never thought I would be a CEO, but that kind of tinkerer's mind that I inherited, I've always, thought about these things, built these things. I would take like online Coursera courses on natural language processing by Chris Manning, who's actually now, ironically, an advisor and angel investor at Forethought. Right after I'd gotten to know him, and it's just like this interesting path where I kept pushing, and then kept asking questions and knocking on the door until eventually, realizing there was going to be a big market here. Again, this idea of question answering, both for myself, but eventually, as I was more in kind of the B2B world, realizing that customers had these problems as well. Pure Storage, where I was at right before starting Forethought, was very well known, or is very well known for their customer service. And so, starting to see these things play out, I was like, "There's definitely something here." So eventually, left my job and started a company. But it wasn't like, yeah, in some senses, if anybody asks, yeah, it was all intended, but really it was like this meandering of focusing on passions and realizing there's a problem to be solved.
Right, right. And then what was that space there? Because I know I've had this conversation a lot, and I'm so interested in that. Like, I'm going to start a company thing, and at some point it's maybe you and a partner, or just somebody by yourself, and you're like literally around the kitchen table, proverbially, or literally, maybe juggling a kid, or something like that. And I just think, like, what is that
Yeah.
space where you? Because I remember the day I walked out of my first or my last real job, and I did startups, right? And but it was not well thought out, and now I look back, I'm like, dude, that was totally nuts. It's like, what the hell was I
Yes.
thinking? Like, it
Yes.
just, now I know better, and I wish I could go and do that same business again without wasting $1 million. Yeah, I don't know. Like, tell that story, because I think that people mistake that,
Story.
and I hear some people be like, "Oh yeah, we did research together for market research for 6 years, and we were totally primed." And other people are like, "Yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was time to, buy a pencil and sharpen it."
Just start from pencil. Yeah, it was a little bit more the latter for me. Um, this was probably late 2016, 2017, I would say. That year was kind of my like, "Hey, am I gonna go do this, year?" Um, and so a few things happened in 2017. One, I still remember, so Stanford released, the Stanford question answer data set, which was, this really cool research data set where, a lot of people were competing and building models to around the question answering problem. So that was interesting, and it kind of felt like, about in 2013-ish, the same thing happened in computer vision, right? Where a data set, I think it was MNIST, the handwriting data set was dropped, and then a bunch of research was built around computer vision, handwriting recognition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now we see, industries like self-driving cars, which are probably going to be trillion-dollar industries. And so you can kind of see this wave happening in many different fields in AI. And for me, because I had just been primed around this NLP revolution I've been thinking about for a decade plus, like seeing these data sets start to come out and the research start to accelerate was one um, interesting factor for me. And again, I just started like tinkering with it, trying to build models and stuff like that. But you could start to feel that this technology was way better than it was when I was back in school. And so there's something coming. So that was, the one piece. But just kind of more on the personal side, yeah, it was super interesting. So here I am in 2017, by the way. My wife and I just had like a kid. Like, so we have this like month-old baby or whatever. So imagine me telling her that I'm my job and start a company. But
Do we need a
so
Kohler on to tell this story? Or-
yeah, just hey, honey, like,
Right.
come on the podcast. But no, so I think what had happened was I started meeting a few people in the entrepreneurship world and in investing world. And this was through a few things, just like, the engineering community. I had also, again, I'm always building kind of projects and things like that. So I had actually released like some cool apps to the app store. Never really took off, but like, like things like that, like just for fun. But just putting myself out there and starting to build and kind of connect with entrepreneurs in the world, that was, I think, the big switch for me because prior to that point, I didn't really think about the idea of starting a company. I didn't think that I could start a company. I'd worked at these amazing tech companies and seen these, really successful CEOs like Drew Houston at Dropbox,
Mhm.
Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, and so on. And I just like had it in my mind that these were just like other classes. Like, these are other people. You know what I mean? Like this is like not, it wouldn't be a thing that I would do. It was just like, okay, those are CEOs, cool. And like you just carry on. But what I think was happening was entrepreneurship in so many ways is just problem solving. And I had problem solving down. That was what I do every single day. I didn't realize that it was actually not that big of a leap from that to entrepreneurship. And so started connecting with people, working on a few apps and ideas. And in that early phases of starting to think about this AI for whatever, like it was just NLP broadly, it was kind of the thing, question answering broadly. I ended up connecting with a couple investors and actually Y Combinator, one of a partner at Y Combinator. And so it was super interesting. They were like, "Oh, you have these cool ideas. Why don't you apply to Y Combinator?" This is like I still remember it was like middle of 2017 or whatever. And so I applied with some, idea that was kind of like, V negative one of a forethought. Didn't get in, but I got an interview. And it was so weird for me. Like I wasn't bummed. I was actually excited. I was like, "Oh, if I can get an interview, that means I'm not a complete idiot." Like that was
Like
fine.
basic
It was
validation.
literally my exactly. I'm like, maybe I can do this. And like, just that was it. And so eventually then I like kind of hunkered down. I was like, all right, I think I'm going to start a company. What is it going to be? And then I spent a few months, kind of thinking about it, incubating it and convincing my friend, Sammy Ghosh, who we met as interns at Palantir a few years before, trying to convince him to jump ship and join me on this crazy quest. Anyway, long story short, ended up, incorporating very late 2017, working in stealth for about 6 months, and then launching at TechCrunch Disrupt as Forethought. And so that was kind of that initial journey. So I think there's this weird switch that flips once you catch the startup bug and you realize, heck, this is possible. And there are, I know, there were problems to solve. So I think the two converging meant it was time to jump.
Yeah. It's interesting story of, sort of selling your friend, right? I've had similar circumstances, and it's sort of like, that's your first big sale. It's like, can I convince people that actually like
Well,
me to
anybody,
come
yeah.
and, jump on board with this? And like, how is it, was it your like charisma and vision? It was just, good enough. Gonna go, okay, I think this works.
Yes, of
Oh
course.
yeah, right. Okay. Just like had a plan all along
You
there.
know?
Okay. I'm understanding this.
But, no, I think, I mean, Sammy and I have a great relationship for many years, and we've always had this kind of rapport where we would bounce ideas off each other. Um, and it was, thinking about AI, Sammy's a genius. He was, his undergrad and master's at Harvard in computer science. I think he graduated at the literal top of his class, was one of the youngest machine learning engineers at LinkedIn, before starting Forethought with me. And so we would just like bounce these AI ideas. I remember like, prior to Forethought, he had a class project on something and he was like, Deon, let's work on this idea together. And so I helped him with the class project and stuff like that and got shout outs in his final project. It was anyway, so that was like our rapport. And so when it was time to be like, let's do this for real, there was a little bit of like, yeah, wait, you're serious? But, also at the same time, it was a pretty natural progression. And I mean, it still took a while because again, prior to us launching at Disrupt, I would say that was like the real, okay, this is real. This is it. We're live. But prior to that, it was just we were in stealth. We were figuring a lot of things out. And so yeah, I think I'm very grateful. I think that Sammy decided to sign up for the journey, and it's been a fun one so far.
I have to ask, the stealth launch thing, is that like just what people say like later on? So, like they can just like cover the sausage making, or like what is actually stealth?
The short answer is
Yes.
absolutely
Okay.
yes. But um, but no, I mean, there's some benefits and like actually tactical benefits to that. Like what I mean is, in the early days, you're kind of following that lean startup playbook, right? If you've ever read that or seen kind of the lean methodology by Steve Blank. Um, And we were hyper focused on 2 things, figuring out so we had already kind of figured out the models. I think prior to doing anything, while we were still in the tinkering phase, building models that could ingest text and then answer questions on it, even like in a very small um, scale was like what we first did. We're like, de-risk the tech. Is it possible to do this kind of thing? Which is, the modern version of generative AI or whatever. But like at the time, it was just, can you answer questions with AI? And that was our first kind of proof point. We used that to raise some money. So we did raise venture funding, a very small amount from K9 Ventures, Manu Kumar, who's on our board now and is just amazing. And so like that was our first milestone was like, get the models working, prove that it was, show it as a demo, get and raise a small amount of funding. And again, I'm, have like a newborn. So I'm like, all right, I probably have to be able to survive and all that at this point. But anyway, and then milestone 2 for us, again, was go to market, right? Figuring out, is there a real market here? Are there customers with a really strong pain point and problem that are willing to pay for this, that are willing to, go to bat with their superiors and test out this tiny startup that nobody's ever heard of. And that became the kind of second milestone because we knew as engineers, ironically, that our biggest downfall would be we would spend too much time in the lab. You know what I mean? Like we would just spend time on all of the fun technology stuff, which was really cool, all the research. But we had this kind of like this mantra, put customers first became one of our values. And it was just like, let's focus on, is there a true problem here? And so we spent a lot of time in early 2018 trying to figure out um, who exactly was the persona, right? Customer support leaders, customer service leaders. Turns out there's actually operations departments within these big companies. And so it's not just customer service specifically, but customer support ops, little things like that. And we also have this grand vision that eventually we can apply this to HR, IT, and all these other things. So being able to kind of de-risk and say no to a lot of those things so we could focus wholly on customer support was huge. Landing our first pilot customers was huge. And when we found out we were going to be launching on stage at TechCrunch Disrupt, we kind of set our internal goal of like we won't launch on stage unless we have 5 customer logos that are willing to be referenceable for us. And that was like our mission statement before Disrupt. And so that whole period before any press or anything, we didn't announce any funding rounds. It was all about laser focus on kind of proving that there was a problem to solve and a persona to solve it for. And then kind of that last phase was like, all right, we're going, we're launching live at TechCrunch Disrupt. And it kind of felt like a nice bookending of that quote unquote stealth period. So I think there was actually some value in just focusing in that way before, the clock starts when you are a company that people have heard of
I
after
mean,
that.
that's exactly the way that you should think about it. I think far too many startups and founders spend, incredible amount of time on, technology and in the lab, like you said, and not on that go to market, get those initial paying or pilot or whatever, like your referenceable customers. And in fact, those things ought to probably be equal time and money. And you don't see that a lot. You see sort of a lot of these things. And now, with sort of explosion, you kind of go like, there's a lot of solutions, but I'm not sure they have the problem right. And you
Exactly.
won't get anybody to pay for that. It's just cool. And I like playing with it. But, I don't know that it solves any problem that I'm willing to pay a great deal of money for. And it sounds like you did that well and you did it intentionally. Where'd that come from as a couple of engineers? Because usually engineers get that raw.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think it was like probably out of paranoia or something. Like, well, again, I had seen just in, app building and tinkering, I'd kind of gone through a lot of that
Mhm.
phase of building for building's sake, and that's just been my whole life. And so it was only when I started to realize, like, look, you got to solve problems for other people. Did I actually take that leap and start becoming an entrepreneur? So I already started to see there's a shift in my own thinking when I was starting the company. But more specifically, to answer your question, two things I did. One, because I didn't know what it meant to be a CEO, right? Like I was like, okay, I was still making this emotional, psychological leap of like entrepreneurship is problem solving in another way. Um, I started listening to a bunch of interviews and just listening to anything I could by great entrepreneurs. So I would go back and listen to Mark Zuckerberg interviews and Drew Houston interviews and so on, but also startup founders, Eric Ries, the lean startup, and I would read as much as I possibly could on how to build a company. And I started seeing a lot of these patterns around, look, distribution matters, go to market matters. If you're not solving a problem, and I kind of just like by sheer, I would call it paranoia, but more just like, focus, realize that this lean startup methodology of prove that you have value, build MVPs, don't just build for the sake of building, but build to prove an experiment and then go from there. And like a startup is a repeated experiment machine. That was starting to kind of get baked into my head. And also because I had, some experience meeting the Y Combinator folks, I watched all the videos of YC Startup School and all of that, right? So like these were just, and it's Paul Graham's build something people want. Like, and
Yeah,
so
right.
you start to see the patterns. And so I was like, okay, failure mode number one is not focusing on a problem people want. And that's the first way to die as a company. And so like, okay, let's just avoid that for first and go on from there. And so it was like that iterative process that led me down the like prove that you have something people want mentality.
Yeah, and I think that's so important for anybody that's thinking about exploring any company. You're just like, I'm going to start a small company, I'm going to start a big company, whatever idea you have. Uh, I would call it that almost like academic discipline of study. I think it's really easy
Yeah,
for like it's easy to behave like, sort of like the pop entrepreneurial press and, like you could post the Paul Graham quote on your LinkedIn and never have read the book or watched the video or
exactly.
studied. And I think that discipline pays off a lot. I mean, I know that I wish I did it. I did all that after blowing up a couple and I was like, clearly marketing is a thing and I should find out about it because I'm not doing it and there's not any money coming in. So,
Yeah, exactly.
I will,
We have to learn these the hard way.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, right. So I definitely did chose the hardest path possible road and didn't study in time. And then I see that that's valuable. I think I would point out in your story just for the listeners, spend the disciplined time, not just on your challenge or your problem set, but on just like your own development of learning things about how to run business. So, no, I love that. And second to last question, I'll say, talk about this, you know, CEO role, and does it take you like I think you have what, 170 people or something now, like. So does it take you away a lot from like the distance to the technology and the problem solving? Like do you miss the tech?
Great question. Um, I would say um, the thing I always try to never lose is connectivity with the
Mhm.
customers. And the CEO role, ironically, like that's where you're supposed to be as plugged into the customers as possible. But going back to your point, there's always a push and pull, right? And as your company gets bigger, right, you think about things like vision setting and setting culture, hiring, creating exec team. Like there's all this stuff you have to do, which is like necessary to build a company. And you kind of have to remember these little nuggets of like blocking time, whether it's a couple hours a week or half an hour a day, just like getting back to the basics. And so for me, that's time with customers. And I think that always that lends itself to the technology because you can kind of hear and feel those problems back to day one, right? What is the problem that they're having that we can solve for them? And also kind of a little bit on the go to market side. And so you kind of straddle both. In terms of actually coding, weirdly enough, I don't miss it, which is like super weird. A lot of my friends are like, "Really?" And it's not because, and I hack, I get back in the ring every once in a while. Like when we were launching Support GPT, which is the name of our engine, the generative AI component of our engine. I was writing code, building prototypes, and using those to like show to the team like, hey, this is possible and things like that. I even built a Chrome extension that our teammates could install to like spoof our own app because I was too lazy to go in and like actually make changes to the code base. But I was like, all right, with this little extension, you can see how our own solve product would change with a GPT enabled or a support GPT enabled engine. And that was like enough to like, create the concept and convey ideas. And so I still hack every once in a while, but I think prototype quality code of like being able to use code to just convey a vision. But what I think I realized I've loved the most about technology, about coding my whole life, and it wasn't actually coding itself, but again, it was that problem solving. That's the thing that I think has stuck with me. And so being able to say, all right, what is the single most critical problem for the business today? And spending the next 1 to 3 months on that and just getting immersed and then solving the problem, working with the team and doing that. That's actually my superpower, so to speak. Right. And coding was one way to do that in the early days. But now it's like you said, it can sometimes be a go-to-market challenge. Sometimes it is a product and you got to think radically new visions and launch, support GPT and change the way the industry thinks. Sometimes it's, we're thinking now about autonomous agents, which we think are actually going to be the future of generative AI and things like that. We open sourced AutoChain, which is this open source library to help you build autonomous agents. And then sometimes it's people and culture and thinking about how do you build a community that scales? How do you build a culture that scales? And so on and so forth. And so I like to think about it as every 3 to 6 months, the primary constraint of the business changes. What is the one thing preventing you from 2x, 10x, 3, whatever it is, 300x growth? And there's often that thing, and that's the most important thing for the business, and that's where the CEO should spend their time. That, and then also building the best team in order to do that. And then lastly, never, never, ever lose sight of spending as much time as possible with customers.
I love that. Thanks so much. Great insights. Before I let you go, I warned you before off mic, so like I always ask the guests is like, okay, we've got a big audience here, leaders of B2B, and you are one of them. And you have a unique perspective and sets of experiences and just the seat you're sitting in now. What should be on everybody's radar, that you're aware of that maybe they aren't?
I mean, one of the things I just talked about was this rise of what I think of as autonomy instead of automation. And it's, I mean, I'm immersed in this world every single day, so it's something that's really top of mind for me, but I think might be interesting for the audience, which is that, what we used to call AI before was all about automation. It was all about rules. Think about like marketing automation technology and Marketo and things like that. You could automate the emails, right? And that's automation. And similarly in customer service or in any use case, you can get automation to do rote tasks. What I think is starting to happen, and I'm super excited for this, like for our industry, but in general, is what I call the rise of autonomy. You're now having AI that can go and take action on your behalf. Imagine in the future when, you need to book your next haircut or whatever, and you don't even need to get on the phone or text somebody. Your AI will go and do it for you. The same thing will happen on the B2B side, having an autonomous agent that can help, train agents, go and take actions, fill out refunds, whatever that is. Eh, My 3-year-old is here with a
Hey,
sword.
that's the most important
But
customer right there. Let me tell you.
most important customer, and I think that little autonomous human right there.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
um,
You have no control over this bot here.
exactly. So what I really am saying is, but no, I think the rise AI that can go and take action on your behalf. I think that's going to happen in kind of every industry. And what we're going to see is the same way there was a wave from desktop to cloud, and we saw the Salesforces of the world kind of take over, so to speak, become $100 billion businesses. I think now there's going to be a wave from system of record to systems of intelligence or systems of autonomy that are going to be the next. It's going to be the new cloud. It's going to be the new internet, right? And so I think that's something super powerful, and I'd be curious to see how folks are seeing that appear in their businesses.
Wow.
That's
Yeah.
my
Yeah, absolutely. As long as it's not the military, right? So we don't.
yeah. Great point.
Yeah, right. That's really interesting. Yeah. It makes me wonder as a sales expert, hey, maybe it's just gonna do my job for me and I just get to to hear like the little guy in the cart in Wally and just, say, hey, so go close that deal for me. So I don't
No, close the
know. Awesome. Deon, super fun to talk to you, man. I love what you've done. I love what you're doing. Anybody that's resonating with, this wants to reach out, have a conversation. What's the best channel to do that on?
Yeah, Ledge. So if anyone is interested in Forethought and what we can do for your customer support team, go to www.forethought.ai. And particularly we have support GPT. So forethought.ai/support GPT. If you want to connect with me, I am available on all the socials. So LinkedIn is my tool of choice, and I'm just Deon Nicholas at LinkedIn. And but you can also find me on Twitter, Threads, Insta, everywhere. And there I'm at Doji Deon, DOJIDEON. Yeah, excited. Please get in touch.
Thanks so much for coming out, Deon. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Ledge. This was so much fun.